So picture one of the greatest scientific minds of the 18th century, a guy who made discoveries that would basically define physics and chemistry for the next 100 years. Now, imagine he kept most of it a secret. Well, that man's name was Henry Cavendish. And back in 1798, he did something that still sounds kinda like a myth. He actually performed an experiment to weigh the entire planet. And that right there is the central mystery of Henry Cavendish, isn't it? The stuff he did publish made him famous. But his private notes, they held a scientific revolution that he basically told no one about. So what was going on with this guy? Let's get into it and try to figure out the story of this brilliant, incredibly secretive man. Okay, so first up, let's talk about the big one, the experiment that put him on the map and made him a legend in his own time, the famous Cavendish experiment. So on paper, his goal was to figure out the density of the Earth. And how'd he do it? He set up this device called a torsion balance to measure the super faint gravitational pull between some big lead balls and some smaller ones. The concept is kind of simple, right? Everything with mass pulls on everything else. But actually doing it, that required a kind of precision that was just mind-blowing for the late 1700s. And this is where you really see Cavendish's genius, this almost fanatical obsession with detail. The force he was trying to measure was so tiny, it's hard to even wrap your head around. It was just 1/50,000,000th of the weight of the smaller ball. So to even have a chance of detecting it, he had to build the whole setup in a separate, sealed room. He couldn't even go in there. He had to observe it using telescopes from the outside just so his own body heat wouldn't create tiny air currents and mess up the whole thing. I mean, come on. This wasn't just science. It was an art form. So after all that incredibly painstaking work, what did he find? His final number for the Earth's density came out to 5.448 times the density of water. Now, get this. That result is so unbelievably accurate, it's within 1% of the modern value we use today. He basically weighed the entire planet from a shed in his backyard, and he absolutely nailed it. But believe it or not, weighing the Earth wasn't his only claim to fame, not by a long shot. Around the same time, he was also a total rock star in the world of chemistry. He took that same incredible precision and pointed it away from the planet as a whole and towards something you can't even see, the air all around us. Yeah, he was a pioneer in what they called pneumatic chemistry, which is basically the study of gases. Way back in 1766, he was the first person to really identify what he called inflammable air, what we now know as hydrogen, as its own unique substance. Then he showed that if you burn that hydrogen in dephlogisticated air, their funky name for oxygen, you get water, just pure water. Now that might sound basic to us, but back then, that was a game-changing discovery. A few years later, in 1785, he published this amazing analysis of the air we breathe. And again, his numbers were spot on. He figured out that air is about 20.8% oxygen and 79.2% nitrogen. But because he was Cavendish, his precision led him to something weird. He noticed that after all his reactions, there was this tiny little bubble of gas left over, about 1/120th of the whole sample. And no matter what he did, it wouldn't react. He had no idea what it was. And here's the crazy part. That little leftover bubble, it wasn't a mistake. It was a discovery, just sitting there, waiting. It took another 100 years for scientists to figure out that this tiny, mysterious residue was a whole new element, argon. Think about that. Cavendish's experiment was so precise that he had discovered a new element without even realizing it. So this is the picture the world had of Henry Cavendish, right? A brilliant, revolutionary scientist, incredibly precise. But the man himself, well, he was a total mystery, a complete and utter recluse. I mean, listen to this one detail. It says it all. He was so shy, especially around women, that he would only communicate with his female servants by leaving them written notes. He couldn't even bring himself to speak to them. This guy was known as the richest of all the savants and the most knowledgeable of the rich. He had more money than he knew what to do with, but he lived this bizarre, solitary life. He actually had a separate staircase built in his house for the sole purpose of avoiding his housekeeper. His only social event was the weekly dinner at the Royal Society Club, and even there his friends knew the deal. You just sort of talked in his general direction and hoped he might mumble a quiet reply. It's behavior like this that has led people, like the famous neurologist Oliver Sacks, to suggest that he might have been on the autism spectrum. And it's this incredibly shy, intensely private personality that's the key to the whole story, because it helps explain how and why he kept one of the biggest secrets in the entire history of science. Okay, so we've seen his public work, discovering hydrogen, weighing the world. That's enough to make anyone a legend, right? But what if? What if that was just the tip of the iceberg? What if his real genius, his most important discoveries, were never even published? So Cavendish died in 1810, and for decades, his massive pile of personal notes and manuscripts just sat there. Nobody really looked at them. Until the 1870s, when another physics legend, James Clerk Maxwell, decided to go through them. And what he found inside those old boxes was, to put it mildly, an absolute shock. It was a bombshell. Maxwell discovered that Cavendish had been doing groundbreaking research into electricity for decades. Things like Ohm's law, which describes electric current, Coulomb's law about the force between charges, Charles's law for gases. The list just keeps going. Cavendish had anticipated or flat out discovered these fundamental laws of science years, sometimes decades before the people who got all the credit. He had this whole unified theory of electricity that he never told anyone about. It was all right there, locked away in his notebooks. So, how do you even begin to sum up a guy like this? On one hand, he's this public hero of science. On the other, he was secretly a one-man scientific revolution who kept it all to himself. You really have to think of his legacy in two parts. There's the public Cavendish, the guy who discovered hydrogen and weighed the Earth, an absolute legend. But then there's the secret Cavendish, the one Maxwell uncovered, a titan of physics who was so far ahead of his time, he was basically having a conversation with the future. It's no wonder that one of the most famous physics labs in the world, the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge, is named after him. It's a perfect tribute. And all this leaves us with one last big question. Henry Cavendish figured out some of the universe's biggest secrets, but for the most part, he kept the answers to himself. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Does a discovery actually count if you never share it? If it doesn't help push human knowledge forward for everyone? It's a question that's just about as heavy as the world he weighed.